War Zone D, South Vietnam, January 8, 1967, 0547. Hours, Captain Nguyen Van Thon pressed his body flat against the floor of his underground bunker as the earth itself seemed to scream. He'd been a company commander in the People's Army of Vietnam for 3 years, had survived countless artillery barrages, and thought he understood American firepower. He was wrong. The first B-52 strike landed 2 kilometers away, a rolling thunder that built like an approaching storm. Then closer, then impossibly, terrifyingly close. The bunker's support beams groaned. Dirt cascaded from the ceiling. A young soldier beside him began to pray, eyes squeezed shut, hands clasped white-knuckled around his AK-47. Thon had laughed just 3 months earlier when Division Headquarters briefed his unit on American search and destroy operations. "Let them search," he'd told his men over rice and fish sauce in this very bunker. "Let them tromp through our jungle like elephants. We know every trail, every stream, every hiding place. We choose when to fight. We are the hunters here, not the Americans." The concussion wave from a direct hit 50 meters away sent Thon's ears ringing into silence. Through the ringing, he heard nothing, and that was worse than the explosions. No birds, no insects, no rustling leaves. Just an eerie dead silence that meant the jungle above them had ceased to exist. He didn't know it yet, but Operation Cedar Falls would leave War Zone D looking like the surface of the moon. More critically, he didn't know that search and destroy, despite its devastating tactical power, would ultimately prove exactly as futile as he'd first believed. The Americans could turn jungle to ash, count thousands of enemy dead, and still lose this war. But first, they would have to learn that lesson in blood. In the climate-controlled conference rooms of the Pentagon and Military Assistance Command, Vietnam, MACV, headquarters in Saigon, the mathematics seemed irrefutable. General Westmoreland stood before maps covered with unit positions and kill ratios, explaining his vision with the confidence of a man who'd studied at West Point and commanded divisions in World War II. "Gentlemen, the solution is straightforward," Westmoreland told his staff in the summer of 1965. "We locate the enemy with superior intelligence and mobility. We fix them in place with coordinated maneuver. We destroy them with overwhelming firepower. We measure success through body count. When enemy casualties exceed their replacement capacity, they will have no choice but to negotiate." It was called attrition warfare, and every statistic supported it. The United States could deploy 500,000 troops to Southeast Asia. American industry could produce ammunition, weapons, and supplies at levels that defied comprehension. The helicopter would revolutionize warfare, allowing rapid insertion and extraction of combat units. Artillery and air power would multiply American lethality exponentially. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, a former Ford Motor Company executive who'd made his reputation by quantifying everything, loved Westmoreland's approach. McNamara had brought systems analysis to the Pentagon, and search and destroy operations produced wonderfully quantifiable data. Sorties flown, tons of ordnance dropped, enemy structures destroyed, body count. "We can chart this," McNamara explained to President Lyndon Johnson in the cabinet room. "We input their birth rates, their infiltration rates, their casualty rates. The crossover point, where we kill them faster than they can replace losses, is mathematically inevitable. 12 to 18 months of sustained operations." The doctrine drew from America's last 2 wars. In World War II, industrial might and attrition had ground down Germany and Japan. In Korea, superior firepower had stabilized the front lines. Search and destroy would combine the best of both: the mobility of mechanized warfare with the firepower dominance of the American way of war. The Viet Cong and NVA are conventional forces masquerading as guerrillas, argued General Earl Wheeler, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They have supply lines, command structures, logistics networks. Find those, cut those, destroy those, and the insurgency collapses. Initial operations in 1965 seemed to validate the theory. Operation Starlight in August 1965 killed nearly 700 Viet Cong while losing 45 Marines, a 15.1 kill ratio. Operation Silver Bayonet in the Ia Drang Valley that November produced similar results. Roughly 1,800 enemy dead versus 305 Americans killed. Costly, yes, but the math still favored attrition. In World War II, we expected to trade casualties, Westmoreland reminded critics. We're doing better than that, much better. Give me the forces, give me the time, and we will bleed them white. The troops on the ground saw things differently. They kept telling us we were winning, recalled Sergeant James Howard of the 1st Infantry Division. Every patrol that made contact, every body we counted, every cache we found, victory. But 2 weeks later, we'd go back to the same goddamn village and get shot at by the same goddamn people. How were we winning? But in 1966, with American troop strength approaching 400,000 and monthly enemy casualties reaching 5,000, the Pentagon remained confident. The crossover point was coming. Search and destroy would work. The numbers proved it. Search and destroy didn't emerge from a single decision, but evolved from a decade of American involvement in Vietnam, each escalation building on the last. When President Dwight Eisenhower sent the first military advisors to South Vietnam in 1954, he never imagined American infantry battalions conducting multi-division sweeps through triple canopy jungle. President John F. Kennedy expanded the commitment, sending 16,000 advisors and introducing helicopters that promised a new kind of warfare. Transportation is the key, Army Chief of Staff General George Decker told Kennedy in 1961. Give us helicopters, and we can move entire battalions anywhere within hours. Mobility defeats guerrilla warfare. The Pentagon's thinkers drew inspiration from British counterinsurgency successes in Malaya and French mobile warfare in Algeria, while conveniently forgetting that the French had lost in Vietnam. General Harold K. Johnson, who became Army Chief of Staff in 1964, pushed for aggressive offensive operations. Defense is defeat, he argued. We must take the war to the enemy, disrupt his sanctuaries, and force him to fight on our terms. When Lyndon Johnson committed ground combat troops in March 1965, Westmoreland already had his blueprint. He'd commanded the 101st Airborne Division and understood mobile warfare. He'd studied how American firepower had devastated German and Japanese forces. He believed, genuinely, deeply, that the same principles would work against the communists in Vietnam. The infrastructure came together rapidly. At Fort Benning, Georgia, and Fort Polk, Louisiana, training programs taught units to operate in jungle environments. Helicopter pilots practiced assault landings and medical evacuations. Forward air controllers learned to coordinate close air support. Artillery officers calculated fire support for infantry operations deep in enemy territory. In Vietnam, logistics bases sprawled across the landscape. Da Nang, Cam Ranh Bay, and Long Binh became miniature American cities with fuel depots, ammunition dumps, maintenance facilities, and headquarters complexes. The 1st Cavalry Division, Airmobile, arrived in September 1965, bringing 435 helicopters and 16,000 troops specifically designed for search and destroy operations. Operation Hump in November 1965 established the pattern. The 173rd Airborne Brigade air-assaulted into War Zone D, swept through suspected enemy base areas, engaged in fierce firefights, and extracted by helicopter. Results: 403 enemy killed, 58 Americans dead. The operation lasted 6 days. This is the future of warfare. Colonel William Cardona, 173rd Airborne Commander, told reporters afterward, "We can insert, engage, and extract before the enemy knows what hit him. Complete battlefield mobility combined with unmatched firepower." But Major Nguyen II, an NVA battalion commander operating in War Zone D, had a different assessment. "The Americans come in their helicopters, shoot at anything that moves, claim victory, and leave. Then we return. They seem to believe destroying our bunkers means destroying our army. They do not understand that we are the people, and the people are everywhere." Operation Crimp in January 1966 revealed the first serious warning sign. The 173rd Airborne and Australian forces swept the Hobo Woods and Iron Triangle, killing 128 enemy soldiers and uncovering the massive Ku Chai tunnel complex, and completely failing to eliminate it. Soldiers discovered 75 miles of interconnected tunnels with hospitals, sleeping quarters, storage rooms, and command centers, all invisible from the surface. "We found their base," said Lieutenant Colonel Robert Haldane, battalion commander. "But we didn't find them. They'd already melted away." Still, the operations continued. Operation Attleboro in November 1966 involved 22,000 American troops, the largest operation to date. 3 weeks of sustained combat in Tay Ninh province produced over 100 enemy killed and tens of thousands of captured documents and supplies. American losses, 150 killed. General Westmoreland declared it a significant victory and requested even more troops. He was planning something bigger, much bigger. Operation Cedar Falls, January 8-26, 1967, the Iron Triangle, 25 miles north of Saigon. Lieutenant Tom Berger's Huey skimmed treetops at 120 knots, part of an armada of 60 helicopters descending on Ben Suk village. The 19-year-old from Wisconsin pressed his M16 against his chest and watched the green blur below. At 06:30 hours on January 8, 1967, he and 6,000 troops from the 1st and 25th Infantry Divisions would secure what intelligence described as a major Viet Cong stronghold. The helicopters touched down in rice paddies and clearings. Engineers moved immediately to establish a cordon. But the scene that greeted Berger defied his expectations. Vietnamese families cooking breakfast, water buffalo grazing, children playing. No massed enemy formations, no fortifications, just a village. "Chiu Hoi," American loudspeakers blared. "You are surrounded. Cooperate and you will not be harmed." Over the next week, American forces relocated Ben Suk's 6,000 residents to a refugee camp, razed every building with explosives and bulldozers, and poisoned the rice paddies with chemical defoliants. The village ceased to exist. Simultaneously, 30,000 troops from multiple divisions converged on the Iron Triangle, a 125-square-mile area of jungle and villages northwest of Saigon that had been communist-controlled since the French Indochina War. If search and destroy would work anywhere, it would work here. Tunnel rats, like specialist Robert Baer, volunteered to descend into the Ku Chai complex, armed only with pistols and flashlights. "First time I went down, I couldn't believe it," Baer recalled decades later. "This wasn't some crude hiding hole. This was infrastructure, medical supplies, classrooms, weapons rooms, dormitories, an entire world under our feet, and we'd been walking over it for months." American engineers tried everything. They pumped acetylene gas into the tunnels and ignited it, hoping to incinerate the complexes. They pumped in CS gas. They dropped specialized munitions. Nothing worked. The tunnel's design, multiple levels, water traps, blast-proof doors, hidden entrances, defeated conventional destruction methods. So they called in the B-52s. Pham Tuan Kiet was a 24-year-old NVA platoon leader sheltering in the Ku Chai tunnels when the arc light strike hit. "We knew the Americans had large bombers," he said in a 1995 interview. We did not know what they could do. The first bombs fell far away. We could feel the vibration through the earth, then closer, then right above us. Arc Light, the B-52 Stratofortress strategic bombing campaign, transformed search and destroy from aggressive infantry operations into industrial-scale devastation. Flying from bases in Guam and Thailand, 3 plain B-52 cells dropped 60,000 pounds of ordnance from 30,000 feet. The bombs created craters 20 feet deep and 30 feet across. A full cell strike could obliterate everything in a box 1 mile long and half a mile wide. You couldn't hear them coming, explained Captain Thon, who survived multiple arc light strikes. No engine noise at altitude, no warning. One moment you're eating rice, the next moment the earth erupts. Men 20 meters away from direct hits simply ceased to exist. Not bodies, nothing. Just a crater where they had been standing. But the mathematics of search and destroy remained stubbornly brutal for both sides. Operation Cedar Falls killed an estimated 750 enemy combatants, destroyed 100 bunkers and 525 tons of rice, and captured 280,000 pages of documents. American losses, 72 killed. By every metric, a stunning success. 3 weeks after Cedar Falls ended, intelligence reported enemy forces had returned to the Iron Triangle. Operation Junction City, February 22nd, May 14th, 1967. War Zone C, Tay Ninh Province, Colonel Alexander Haig, future Secretary of State but then a young staff officer, watched the largest airborne assault since World War II unfold on February 22, 1967. 240 C-130 and C-141 aircraft dropped 845 paratroopers from the 173rd Airborne Brigade to establish the northern cordon for Junction City. Meanwhile, ground units from 4 American divisions and 1 South Vietnamese division, 25,000 troops total, converged on War Zone C to trap and destroy the Central Office for South Vietnam, COSVN, the Communist headquarters. The operation lasted 82 days. American forces conducted continuous search and destroy missions, sweeping every suspected base area, calling in arc light strikes on suspected troop concentrations, and aggressively pursuing any enemy contact. Sergeant Ron Kovich, future anti-war activist but then a Marine scout, participated in dozens of patrols during Junction City. We'd hump through the jungle for hours in a 100-degree heat, carrying 60 pounds of gear, looking for an enemy that was everywhere and nowhere, he recalled. When we made contact, it was always on their terms, an ambush, a sniper, a booby trap. Then they'd vanish. We'd call in artillery, jets, gunships, turn the jungle into kindling, count bodies, declare victory, move on. The numbers for Junction City were staggering. 2,128 enemy killed, 34 captured, 65 defectors, 850 individual and 137 crew-served weapons captured, 500,000 pages of documents seized, 810 tons of rice destroyed. American and ARVN losses, 282 killed. But COSVN was never found. Intelligence later determined that Communist headquarters had relocated to Cambodia weeks before the operation began. They'd known it was coming through infiltrated ARVN units and village intelligence networks. Lieutenant General Nguyen Chi Thanh, commander of Communist forces in South Vietnam, issued a directive to his subordinates in March 1967. The Americans can destroy our bases, but they cannot destroy our will. Every base they demolish, we rebuild. Every tunnel they flood, we dig deeper. Every forest they defoliate, we use for rice fields. They fight to accumulate bodies. We fight to liberate our country. Patience will defeat firepower. Private First Class Gerald Kumpf, 1st Infantry Division, expressed the growing frustration felt by American infantrymen. We'd take a hill, lose guys taking it, dig in, hold it for a week, then get orders to abandon it. Next month, we'd be back taking the same goddamn hill again. What was the point? We weren't holding ground. We weren't protecting anybody. We were just bait for body count. The realization spread through American units like a virus. Search and destroy produced impressive statistics, but no strategic progress. Territory wasn't held. Villages weren't secured. The enemy didn't negotiate. They just kept fighting. By mid-1967, search and destroy operations had evolved into a deadly chess match, where both sides adapted tactics, learned from losses, and developed new approaches to familiar problems. American Tactical Evolution Fire Support Base, FSB, construction became central to American operations. Rather than operating from distant bases, infantry units established temporary fortified positions in remote areas, bringing 105mm and 150mm artillery within range of suspected enemy concentrations. FSB Thrust, FSB Gold, FSB Crook. These mud and sandbag fortresses sprouted throughout South Vietnam's jungles and highlands. The firebase gave us staying power, explained Major David Hackworth, one of the Army's most decorated officers. Instead of hit-and-run operations, we could saturate an area for weeks. Constant patrolling, immediate artillery support, helicopter resupply. We became a permanent threat. Free fire zones expanded dramatically. Entire regions where any movement could be engaged without permission, populated or not. The logic was coldly pragmatic. If civilians remained in these areas after evacuation orders, they must be enemy sympathizers. Critics called it indiscriminate. Advocates called it practical. Technology integration accelerated. Acoustic and seismic sensors airdropped along infiltration routes would detect movement and radio back data. Chemical defoliants, Agent Orange, Agent White, Agent Blue, stripped away jungle canopy to deny concealment. Roam plows, massive bulldozers with special blades, carved swaths through forests, eliminating vegetation that offered cover. We were fighting nature as much as the enemy, said Major James Wilson, Engineer Battalion Commander. The jungle was their ally, so we killed the jungle. 40-foot-tall trees reduced to stumps in minutes. Mangrove forests turned to mud flats. We created moonscapes. Unit tactics became more aggressive and sophisticated. Reconnaissance and force missions using company-sized elements would deliberately provoke contact, then withdraw while calling in massive fire support. Hunter-killer teams, light observation helicopters working with gunships, hunted individuals and small groups. Combat tracker teams using German shepherds followed blood trails and scent. But infantry morale deteriorated as the futility became apparent. We'd get orders to sweep the same valley we'd swept last month, recalled Staff Sergeant Robert Burke. Same ambush sites, same booby traps, same villages that claimed they'd never seen any VC. Different guys would die, but otherwise nothing changed. You started to wonder who the hell was making these decisions. Vietnamese counter-evolution. The NVA and Viet Cong adapted with remarkable speed and effectiveness. The tunnel systems that Americans discovered at Cu Chi and the Iron Triangle represented just one layer of a comprehensive defensive network. By 1967, thousands of miles of tunnels laced communist-controlled areas, many connected to vast underground base complexes. Senior Colonel Huang Van Tai, deputy commander of NVA forces, articulated the counter doctrine in internal directives. When the enemy advances, we retreat. When the enemy camps, we harass. When the enemy tires, we attack. When the enemy retreats, we pursue. American firepower is devastating. Therefore, we must negate it through proximity and dispersion. The grab them by the belt tactic emerged as the primary counter to American air and artillery support. By closing to point-blank range with American units, sometimes literally within arm's reach during firefights, Communist forces made it impossible for Americans to use supporting fires without hitting their own troops. In one firefight near Dak To, recalled Captain Thon. We heard the American commander screaming into his radio for artillery and air support. But we were too close to his men. If his artillery fired, he would kill his own soldiers. We knew this. He knew this. So we stayed close, and the fight became rifle against rifle, grenade against grenade. Intelligence and early warning systems proved devastatingly effective. Communist agents infiltrated ARVN units, civilian labor forces working on American bases, and even served as interpreters. Major operations like Cedar Falls and Junction City, involving weeks of planning and thousands of troops, couldn't be kept secret. We knew Operation Cedar Falls was coming 10 days before the first helicopter landed. Major Pham Van Dinh, a regimental commander, admitted years later. We moved our headquarters, dispersed our units, cached our supplies, and prepared ambush sites along likely American routes. When they arrived, they found what we wanted them to find: empty bunkers and old documents. Cache systems became increasingly sophisticated. Instead of maintaining large supply depots vulnerable to discovery, Communist forces established hundreds of small caches throughout their operating areas. Rice buried in waterproof containers, ammunition hidden in false graves, weapons concealed in hollow trees. Lose one cache, and 99 others remained untouched. The disappearing army tactic frustrated American commanders. After a major operation and dozens of casualties, enemy units would simply vanish, not retreating to a base, but dispersing into the population. The company commander became a farmer. The platoon leader became a village teacher. The rifleman became a fisherman. When Americans left, the army coalesced again. "You could never pin them down," complained Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Burton. "We'd have solid intelligence, a full battalion in a specific grid square. We'd hit it with everything: arc light, artillery prep, infantry assault, find some bunkers, maybe a dozen bodies, claim victory. Next week, that battalion would hit one of our convoys 20 miles away." Where the hell were they hiding? The psychological dimension grew increasingly important. Communist forces targeted American morale through selective attacks, particularly against rear area troops who felt safe. Mortar attacks on base camps, sapper attacks on airfields, ambushes of supply convoys, none strategically significant, all psychologically devastating. "The constant threat wore you down," explained Specialist Michael Clodfelter, who served with the 9th Infantry Division. "You could be in a supposedly secure base camp, eating hot food, and mortar rounds would start dropping. No warning, just boom, boom, boom. Kill a couple guys, wound a dozen more, then silence. Every day you survived made the next day worse, because you knew the odds were catching up." By late 1967, search and destroy had evolved into something neither side initially envisioned: a grinding, attritional stalemate, where American forces could dominate any tactical engagement, but couldn't translate tactical victories into strategic success. 1967, the year of maximum effort. The statistics from 1967 seem to validate Westmoreland's strategy. American and Allied forces conducted 3,690 battalion-sized operations and countless smaller missions. Over 485,000 American troops were in country, supported by the most sophisticated logistics system ever created. Monthly enemy casualties exceeded 8,000. The crossover point, where enemy losses outpaced replacements, appeared to have been reached. Operation Pershing in Binh Dinh Province ran from February 1967 to January 1968, making it the longest operation of the war. The 1st Cavalry Division conducted relentless search and destroy missions. 350 enemy killed, 1,253 captured. American losses: 320 killed. Operation Francis Marion in the Central Highlands lasted from April 1967 to October 1967. Multiple battalions from the 4th Infantry Division and 173rd Airborne Brigade saturated suspected enemy base areas. 1,619 enemy killed, 216 captured. American losses, 169 killed. Operation Yellowstone along the Cambodian border in December 1967 produced similar results. 254 enemy killed, 23 captured. American losses, 122 killed. Each operation followed the established pattern. Intelligence identified enemy concentrations. American forces air assaulted or marched into the area. Combat ensued. Overwhelming firepower was applied. Bodies were counted. Victory was declared. Troops redeployed. "We were winning every battle," observed Colonel Harry Summers, a military analyst who served multiple tours. "The enemy couldn't mass forces without being devastated. They couldn't hold territory. They couldn't match our firepower. By conventional military standards, we were destroying them." Lieutenant Nguyen Van Tin, who commanded a company in the 9th VC Division, saw things differently. "Yes, we suffered terrible casualties. Yes, American firepower was beyond anything we'd imagined. But we also noticed that Americans never stayed. They would come, fight, leave. We would return. Our casualties were heavy, but America's will was not unlimited. We could outlast them." The Tet Offensive, Tactical Victory, Strategic Catastrophe. On January 31, 1968, during the Lunar New Year truce, 84,000 communist troops launched coordinated attacks on cities and bases throughout South Vietnam. The Tet Offensive violated every principle of communist military doctrine. It massed forces in cities where American firepower advantages were maximized, abandoned the rural guerrilla warfare that had proven so effective, and attempted to hold ground against vastly superior American technology and firepower. By conventional military analysis, Tet was a catastrophic defeat for communist forces. In the week-long Battle of Hue, American Marines and Army troops killed an estimated 5,000 enemy soldiers while losing 216. In Saigon, enemy forces were eliminated within days. Everywhere, American firepower crushed the offensive. Final casualty figures for the entire Tet Offensive: approximately 45,000 communist troops killed, 6,000 captured. American losses, 3,895 killed. South Vietnamese losses, 4,954 killed. Westmoreland declared it a military defeat of unprecedented proportions for the enemy. He was technically correct and strategically irrelevant. American television showed enemy soldiers inside the U.S. Embassy compound in Saigon. CBS News anchor Walter Cronkite declared the war unwinnable. The American public asked a devastating question. If we're winning so decisively, why are 84,000 enemy troops able to launch coordinated nationwide attacks? The credibility gap became unbridgeable. Every body count, every operation success, every optimistic briefing from MACV headquarters collapsed under the weight of Tet's psychological impact. Search and Destroy had produced 3 years of tactical victories and 1 strategic failure. "I remember reading the after-action reports from Tet," recalled Colonel David Hackworth. "Incredible kill ratios, annihilated enemy units, decisive American victories. And I remember thinking, if we're winning this decisively, why does it feel like we're losing?" President Johnson announced on March 31, 1968, that he wouldn't seek re-election. Westmoreland was promoted to Army Chief of Staff, effectively removed from command. General Creighton Abrams replaced him and began shifting strategy away from search and destroy toward clear and hold operations and Vietnamization, training South Vietnamese forces to conduct the war themselves. The shift was an implicit admission: search and destroy had failed. The mathematics of futility. The raw numbers told the story. From 1965 to 1968, the United States conducted thousands of search and destroy operations. American forces killed an estimated 200,000 enemy combatants. The U.S. dropped 4.6 million tons of ordnance on Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, more than all of World War II. B-52s flew over 126,000 sorties. Tactical aircraft flew hundreds of thousands more. And enemy strength in South Vietnam remained constant at approximately 280,000 troops. We were killing them at a rate that should have destroyed any conventional army, explained Lieutenant General Philip Davidson, MACV intelligence chief. But North Vietnam had a population of 20 million. They could draft 200,000 young men annually, and they were willing to accept casualties that would have broken any Western nation. The crossover point was a mathematical illusion. Specialist James Webb, future Secretary of the Navy, but then an infantry platoon commander, captured the grinding futility. We'd set up night ambushes in the rain, go days without sleep, lose guys to snipers and booby traps, call in artillery on suspected enemy positions, find blood trails and drag marks that proved we'd hit them. Mission success. Do it again tomorrow, and the day after, and the week after. For what? To add to the body count? We weren't liberating villages. We weren't holding territory. We were just grinding. The B-52 arc-light strikes, the ultimate expression of search and destroy firepower, demonstrated both the tactic's devastating effectiveness and its strategic bankruptcy. From 1965 to 1973, B-52s dropped 2.6 million tons of bombs on Indochina, creating landscapes that resembled World War I's Western Front. After an arc-light strike, nothing lived, recalled Captain Thon, the NVA company commander. Trees reduced to splinters, earth churned into craters, the smell of explosive and death everywhere. We learned to respect arc light above all American weapons. But we also learned it couldn't defeat us. We dug deeper, dispersed more, moved constantly. The Americans could devastate square kilometers of jungle, but Vietnam is a big country. Richard Nixon's election in November 1968 on a promise to end the war marked search and destroy's effective conclusion. While combat operations continued until 1973, the strategy of using American infantry and overwhelming firepower to achieve victory through attrition was abandoned. Vietnamization, making the war South Vietnam's to fight, implicitly acknowledged that search and destroy had failed to achieve its objective. The final American combat units withdrew in March 1973. South Vietnam fell in April 1975. In the end, all the body counts, all the operations, all the firepower meant nothing. We never lost a major battle, General Westmoreland observed in his memoirs. But we lost the war. That paradox defines Vietnam. The lesson of search and destroy echoed through subsequent American conflicts. In Iraq and Afghanistan, military planners consciously avoided large-scale sweep operations disconnected from political objectives. Clear, hold, build replaced search and destroy. Population security superseded enemy casualties. The body count as a metric of success was abandoned as discredited. Nguyen Van Than, the NVA company commander who survived Operation Cedar Falls and dozens of subsequent battles, reflected in a 2005 interview. American soldiers were brave. Their weapons were magnificent. Their firepower was terrifying. But they were fighting the wrong war. You cannot bomb a people into surrender when they believe they are fighting for their homeland. Search and destroy assumed war is mathematics. Inputs and outputs, casualties and ratios. But revolutionary war is political. We were willing to accept any level of casualties to reunify Vietnam. How could mathematics defeat that? For American veterans, the legacy is more personal and painful. Specialist Michael Clodfelter, who wrote extensively about his Vietnam experience, summarized the grinding futility. We measured success in bodies. We turned jungle to desert. We broke enemy units again and again. And we learned that you can win every battle and still lose everything that matters. That's the lesson of search and destroy. Overwhelming tactical superiority is worthless without achievable strategic objectives. The jungle has returned to War Zone D. The craters have filled with water and vegetation. The bunkers have collapsed. But the lesson remains. Firepower, no matter how devastating, cannot substitute for strategy. And no amount of enemy dead can win a war that shouldn't be fought on those terms. Search and Destroy promised to turn American industrial and military might into victory through mathematics. Instead, it became a cautionary tale about the limits of firepower, the importance of political objectives, and the danger of confusing tactical success with strategic victory. The B-52s did turn jungle into Moonscape. The body counts did reach staggering levels. American forces did dominate every conventional engagement. And America lost the war anyway. That paradox, victory in every battle, defeat in the war, remains Search and Destroy's enduring legacy. A reminder that in war, especially Revolutionary War, the enemy gets a vote. And some enemies would rather die than quit.